Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Voss, Editor-in-Chief of Disability Media, and I'm so happy to be with you guys once again at this amazing Unity 4J vigil for Julian Assange. I thank you for all of our previous guests and Susie Dawson and their amazing job so far. I'm here right now with Kathy Vogan, who is an Australian filmmaker. She's an artist and she's a broadcaster and she's a journalist, and she has an amazing story to tell us in this first section of this segment about how she got involved with WikiLeaks and how the previous guest, Commander X, kind of provoked a flood of memories for her about her experience in about 2012 with WikiLeaks. Kathy, thank you for being here.
Hi, how are you? It's nice to be on again.
Yeah.
Really is. Well, when I was madly searching for the link to join the conference for some time, panicking a little bit when I was seeing 2 minutes, but finally I found it. So I did catch a glimpse of Commander X. He was talking, but what drew my attention in particular was the anonymous mask up on the wall behind him, and that did bring back a flood of memories. Particularly not the mask that was on his wall, but this one. This one, I guess people who've been following WikiLeaks for a long time will remember. This is the mask that Julian wore a week before he went into the Ecuadorian Embassy, and he was saying, I'm just warning you that maybe pretty soon you're not going to see me anymore, right? That's all we knew. That was the only kind of warning that something was going to happen. Now, why I'm saying it, it's not actually the one he wore, but it's made by the same artist, Clark Stockley, who drove the WikiLeaks truck, right? And he's a sculptor. Now, when I was on my travels around the world trying to interview people, it's a lot easier for you guys because you you can just we can all do it with a few clicks and a bit of tech support behind. But I had to actually get in a plane and go to America. Where I interviewed Nozomi Hayase, the wonderful writer, Nozomi magazine. I interviewed Daniel Ellsberg, I interviewed Noam Chomsky, and I interviewed Clark Stockley, the WikiLeaks truck driver, who was just in the process of auctioning the WikiLeaks truck off. So it was quite an exciting evening. And the film's called Wiki Trucking Man. But anyway, Clark had a whole lot of, he only had a couple of these. And I said, well, this is a very special mask, so can I have one, please? So I gave him some money and he sent me the mask. But that also, while we were waiting to go on, I also told you that for about the first 5 or 6 months of helping WikiLeaks, I on my blog, it was just anonymous, and it was because I was really frightened. I was a teacher, and WikiLeaks was being called a terrorist organization. There was this thing about material aid, so most people didn't know that I'd made the WikiLeaks tape. Somebody asked me one day, a close friend, which film did you make? And I said, oh, I made all of them. And he said, what? And I said, well, yeah, I was anonymous for most of the time because I was afraid of the persecution I could see coming on other people, not just Julian, but all the people who surrounded him. The problem of offering material aid to a terrorist organization, and we knew it was bullshit, just the same kind of bullshit as a hostile non-state intelligence agency. From Mike Pompeo, it's to get around the Second Amendment. But anyway, so Senator Scott Ludlam did actually talk to me about that, and that didn't allay my fears. So it was only when I interviewed Noam Chomsky, and he was so respected in the academic community, I was like, why am I hiding this? It's not fair. So that was when I first signed my name on blog, just on the About page. I just put myself, and of course I've got a digital footprint going back to the 80s. only documents things that I did in the 80s, but it all got put together starting in about 1994 when I started building my first website. So I was squeaky clean. I don't do anything illegal. It was just a journalist. But it's funny how the wave of fear can just spread out to
Exactly.
the whole ecosystem of truth telling, and it's still doing it today. And I really do feel. I mean, that was 6 years ago. Of course, the week later, after this, Julian appeared in this mask, then woke up to, and I related this the last time, but woke up to the news that he'd gone to the embassy. And we waited for quite a while to find out that he'd got political asylum. And then we've been waiting 6 years. It's been drawn out. We learned that the Crown Prosecution Service were, doing their best to draw it out for longer, for years. So there's been this incredible period of waiting. And even since this critical moment, it's been a long time. Moreno's coming to England for 6 days. He's going to, obviously he's going to talk to the foreign minister about Julian Assange. Jeremy Hunt said that he was facing serious charges. Mike Pence had been to see him as well. So we thought it was about to happen any day.
Well, we were told by multiple news organizations that it was going to happen any day. And I know that for those of you, the viewers who didn't watch the emergency event that we held, when all of that sort of broke, you were there, you participated in that. So we were all very, very concerned about what might happen over the week or so that you're referencing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was convinced. I was calling people to run to the embassy and stand by Karen O'Reilly. He can't do it on his own. But I mean, it was really significant, his role back then, 6 years ago, because the British police were about to storm the embassy. I mean, this is crazy stuff at an international diplomacy level, but they were almost ready to do it. They were so goddamn desperate to shut Julian up. And it was because Karen alerted the media and the people to what was going on there that I think that played a great role in it not happening. But, it's like a slow agony for all of the people who care about Julian, and it's just got worse for us as well. And this long period of silence, I've heard Felicity Flick say, we miss him, even if it's just for an argument. But
yes,
it seems
exactly.
Seems like this fear is being maintained because, in the absence of legality, there's nothing else but the prolongment of the dissuasion, the deterrent, not only to Julian because, they weren't wanting to break him, and I don't know how close they've got. I don't think they would even touch, sort of go across the surface. He's so resilient. But, it's very, very effective, this deterrent of fear that is being permanently maintained over, And in the meantime, they conduct their campaign of propaganda and lies against the whistleblower. Not the whistleblower, he's not a whistleblower. That's something that people have to understand. He's the publisher. But, all of this time to create hatred, to take advantage of the women's movement, of those women in Sweden as well. I mean, their life must have been hell. To turn different communities away from their support of WikiLeaks, which was ubiquitous 6 years ago. I mean, it was just too strong. And even then, they were ready to storm the embassy to drag him out. My God, how they hate the truth. They hate facts.
Absolutely. And because WikiLeaks is such a safe place, it's a safe vehicle for whistleblowers, as John Kiriakou has told us multiple times in these vigils. And so they're wanting to remove that safe interface for whistleblowers to go to, for sure. And I think one of the things you brought up that I think is really, really worth noting and emphasizing is the uncertainty, because we can talk about isolation. We've talked about isolation a lot, but I think another underestimated and aspect of this that causes so much anguish, as you said, is the uncertainty of not knowing how or when this is going to be resolved, and having that really huge increase in hype that it was going to be any day, and then it's not. I think that is a form of mental torture as well. So I think that's something people should take into account more, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is that, we have that professor of law who was in the emergency meeting. What was his name?
I don't know which one. I can't remember either right now, honestly.
He was
Greg Barnes?
No, not Greg Barnes.
Yeah.
He would be flattered if you said he was a professor of law. No, this was an American. I think he was retired. He was, but talking about Greg as well, what he says as well. We can't fight this with the rule of law, because it's being broken all the time. And then we discover, like naming and shaming, and we discover that, we found out that they were breaking the rules, the Crown Prosecution Service, obstructing the course of Swedish justice in a way. I mean, there was definite complicity. We wonder how much what role Karl Rove played in that as well. But the thing is that, we're trying to present rational arguments, and at the same time you have like a rogue state and almost a rogue judicial system as well, that you go, well, how do we fight this now? Because the forces of law and order who operate on their behalf are very real. There's nothing ambiguous about their actions. So it's been a very, very difficult struggle. And of course, we need public opinion. We need boots on the ground. We need, we need bodies to say, we're going to protect this guy. But it becomes very, very visceral in a way. It becomes like a battle in the middle of the jungle. It's strange because it's not rational. It's not. Even Greg Barnes said that the fine normally for bail breach would be a fine, a small fine probably, but it would just disappear if the whole case had been dropped. I mean, there wouldn't be anything anyway, and it's still maintaining prison, and the whole purpose of delaying. Sweden was prison. That maybe the whole purpose of delaying it was to break Julian so he'd walk out and then he'd be taken to prison. It seems like custody is the purpose of all of these tactics.
Definitely, yeah. Because
that's going to create the situation for the sealed indictment to be open. Exactly. It really does worry me, the serious charges that Jeremy Hunt, Foreign Minister of the UK, was talking about. I wish he'd come clean with what he thinks they are, because we haven't a clue. There haven't been any charges, not in Sweden, not in the UK. That's not a charge, breaching bail. That's,
exactly. There's a warrant for it, as Greg explained. There is a warrant, but that doesn't mean that he has a charge. It's difficult. I mean, I'm not a legal mind. I know a lot of, people out in the public are not legal minds. And so when they're presented the wrong language or terminology by the establishment media, they don't know the difference, and they don't check themselves, because a lot of people just don't have time to anyway. But it's a good point that there is no charge against him at all whatsoever, at least not publicly.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. I don't see Julian walking out of his own accord ever, because it would really, for him, I suppose it's all about continuing his work. He's in a dreadful situation between the devil and the deep blue sea, where he can't continue it where he is, but there's no point in walking out because the most likely scenario is not going to be ever able to continue it again. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't think that Moreno's got the guts to actually kick him out. I mean, we thought he was going to. That's an interesting take.
That's a very interesting take. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Well, he's going to be breaking his own constitution.
And he's definitely, I think, from what I've seen, he definitely seems to be facing a lot of public backlash in his own country over this too. A lot of Ecuadorians seem extremely angry, with good reason, that he's just giving up their sovereignty, in a sense, to the US, you know?
Not only that, they gave him their vote to protect Julian. That was part of his platform. And we thought he was very aligned with Rafael Correa. But, you know, he's done this complete flip. I can understand. It's, you know, going to, like, he's a sort of Judas in a way. Didn't you say something about 30 pieces of silver?
I did. Well, Susie had tweeted, "What's the price on his head?" And so I then replied saying, "It isn't 30 pieces of silver, is it?" You know, just as a
So he's playing that kind of role, and that's, I mean, the right wing candidate at the time was, you know, had declared that he was going to terminate this, and there were good economic reasons to do so for Ecuador, which kind of shames Australia, because they're a tiny impoverished country, and we've left the protection of Julian up to them for 6 years. We haven't done diddly. Right.
That is such a brilliant point.
Two representatives from the Australian High Commission went to the embassy. Jen Robinson wasn't able to tell us exactly what the purpose of the visit was. We had our fingers crossed that it was in relation to passport, but then there's just been silence ever since. John Pilger, Ross Cameron, and one other legal person said that that Malcolm Turnbull, our Prime Minister, could sort this out in no time, that he's got the power to do so, to negotiate with the British over the penalty for breaching bail. I mean, this is kind of ridiculous, but, you know, if that could be a fine, and he would take Julian back to Australia. I think that those, you know, and Malcolm Turnbull, as John Peel just said, when he spoke to him 7 years ago, Malcolm Turnbull wasn't the Prime Minister, and he expressed a lot of support for WikiLeaks at the time. So he must still feel that now. And, you know, I think it would be in Malcolm Turnbull's best interests to do something courageous, because he's been accused of cowardice and inertia for so long as Prime Minister. What is this one going to be remembered for? Why don't you take an example from Obama, who released, commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning? Why don't you, you know, get our citizen out who hasn't done any crime and is being tortured? For God's sake, you know, wake up and be a leader. So yeah. I wish that would happen, a kind of a backroom deal, but I don't know. It's just the Americans seem so desperate for so long to get their hands on Julian, because William Binney, I was listening to that wonderful documentary about him, and he was talking about, you know, surveillance going, and also intolerance of dissidents, going right back to Caesar Augustus. He was talking about the Stasi, the Soviet Union, the Nazis. You know, if people said anything out of line that the governments didn't like, they simply disappeared them. But, you know, very often bumped them off. But this necessity to know what people, the population, are thinking, and being able to predict how they're going to react is not new. It's just that we have this technology now that makes it incredibly easy. And Binney said, why do they want to do that, have all this information? Well, so they can control us. And, you know, when you look at the work that Cambridge Analytica did for the Trump campaign, and also they're now shown involvement in Brexit as well, through the aggregate IQ proxy, which was actually, almost the same thing. It was in British Columbia, but it was common staff. Chris Wiley has told us all about that. But the mission statement of Cambridge Analytica was, to be able to predict how people are going to behave. The whole purpose of that study, which was started with by Dr. Michael Kaczynski, was about analysing personality traits, pulling in more information in order to anticipate how people are going to behave. And then a potential was seen to be able to step in during that observation process and make it a two-way one, where lots of the once the information was gathered about your personality, then the right kind of persuasive material would be sent to, as Alexander Nick said, shift people a little bit more to the right and get that majority for a Trump win. Right, a very narrow majority it was as well. So there is a new wave happening now where we used to be just observed, and Binny was talking about this. We used to be just observed by corporations, and then the intelligence community, particularly the FBI, were putting sniffers on that to siphon up all of the information that was in relation to people who, mainly dissidents, troublemakers, to neutralize them. Neutralize is maybe a bit of a strong word, but sometimes just isolate or get nobody to listen to those people anymore. But the thing is, what has happened in the last few years is that there's been a sort of a little leak or an exodus from the intelligence community, and in parallel, a leak from academia, right? You know that Hogan was given all of that user data for an academic study, but you have two government departments coming, these people moving on up to the private sector, taking their savvy with them, and all those data sets, and actually finding, a market back with government again, but particular parties, and Nick said usually the incumbent party, to actually manage their campaign and the flow of information. And basically, I was going to say fuck with their heads, but I didn't want to swear. To brainwash us into believing that, Trump is the savior. I mean, there's this goddamn film called,
well, I just want to say,
visionary film about Trump, about like the second coming or something. But it's screening in hundreds of movie theaters around America about this guy who had a visitation from God and a vision that 6 years ago that Trump was going to be president.
Well, there are always a few outliers within the society that have just very interesting, I guess maybe delusions. But I think that I just want to add that when you mentioned earlier that you'd watched the documentary with Bill Binney, I want to let people know that haven't watched that themselves. That's, I believe, titled The Good American. And so if you want to go Google that, The Good American and Bill Binney, that is a fantastic documentary for anybody that hasn't seen it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think, now that we've got to this different stage where they've really got, worse than Big Brother, who was just watching us, but this creature right inside your head now telling you what to think. They just don't want people like Assange to short circuit that. They're sitting pretty where, everybody's parroting the poison that the likes of Cambridge Analytica inject into the bloodstream of the internet, and voting like nice little people for the author of this propaganda. So I mean, I'm one of those people who are putting a kind of a spanner in the works as well by looking into it. And I guess you have to give credit to The Guardian for digging up Chris Wylie and getting him to blow the whistle on all of this. I know that they've been really shitty, but especially back in the days of when it was David Lee and Luke Harding, although Luke Harding's still around. Now it's Carol Cadwalader. That was awful back in the day where they published the password to the cables.
And then and then I want to add that is what has then led, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that what has then led some people to falsely claim that WikiLeaks, effectively doxed some people, et cetera, when that's not what happened? It was this leak beforehand that sort of did that. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. David Lee and Luke Harding wrote a book. Was it Inside WikiLeaks? I think it was called. And in one of the chapters, I started off by saying, we should be grateful that they dug up Chris Wylie and got revelations about that, and I stand by that. But back then, it was they played a big role in vilifying and really turning the world against WikiLeaks and the whole blood on their hands scenario. So they published a book, and at the beginning of one of the chapters, maybe it was chapter 10, there was the password. It was a long phrase for the cables. It's something about a history of diplomacy. But the thing was, it didn't get noticed. Didn't get noticed for about 6 months, and I think it came out in the January, and then suddenly German newspapers, I think it was Zeitung, did an article about it and said, there was suspicions that Daniel Domscheit-Berg had gone to the papers, and we don't know that, but that people talk. But anyway, it was brought to the attention then of the press that the password had been revealed, and that it was still the password, and that was the password that was given just to the Guardian to give them access so that they could do their journalism. Now, it was so irresponsible to do that. The situation that I do remember, we were all, all the close supporters, we were all in a state of crisis that night, and in chat. We were voting. Julian was crowdsourcing, what shall I do, what shall I do? The problem was that although that password now was being seen all around the world, ordinary people didn't have the technical competence to actually go there and access them. You had to have strong computer skills. But that didn't mean that intelligence agencies and criminal organizations all around the world didn't have the skills to already go and look at the names of people, and this was unredacted stuff.
Exactly.
And start pursuing them. So I mean, the thing was that night, WikiLeaks, people kept saying to Julian, don't do it, you'll get the blame. And he was saying, well, the problem is that they're already on their way to kill these people and arrest them. And these people don't even know yet. So the only way that we can save the lives of these people who have been informants is to actually publish it and give them a chance to escape. So it was an act of mercy, but it all got turned right around. Of course, the Guardian weren't going to portray themselves as the villains in that story, but it was the most irresponsible act to put out that password and put so many lives at risk. And these were presumably the allies of America who had, dobbed in was it Taliban or and maybe warlords as well. But it was the main risk I remember was Afghanistan. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and because I think one misperception, and the reason I'm really glad you brought that up is because one misperception people often seem to have about WikiLeaks is this idea that they just publish everything completely and utterly unfiltered. And, you know, what you're talking about is the fact that they don't, and that's exactly the type of redaction that they're very careful with. They have people that help them not only verify, but redact in the way you're talking about in every release. And, you know, that episode is exactly the type of thing they don't do. They don't just release everything untouched. And I know the people that like yourself that have been a supporter of Julian and close in that circle for a long time, that's just totally obvious to you. And like, yes, of course they do that. But, you know, a lot of people who don't know anything about it, they just think that WikiLeaks just publishes everything untouched. So I think that's really great that you brought that up.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was the ultimate act of Vichy journalism because, you know, it was done to put the blame on WikiLeaks. I mean, all of the close supporters were saying that night, this is a terrible night for WikiLeaks. What an awful decision to, you know, put the future of your organization in jeopardy and the whole activity, or and save lives, or save the organization, and these people are dead, you know, in no time. And so, once again, I mean, the wise decision was made. Put the information out now and give those people a chance to get away. I mean, it was real treachery. I mean, if this was a coordinated movement and it wasn't just a stupid mistake, I mean, David Lee's a very smart guy, and you know he's had a lot to do with government and you know that area of intelligence. He you know, I should have checked. So, but if it was not coordinated, then it was a terrible betrayal of those people who had informed the Americans about, you know, terrible things that were going on because they believed in them, right? And then suddenly this happens, and their lives are put in danger. All to blame it on WikiLeaks. And it was just so ugly to see that happen, that people would say that it was WikiLeaks that had blood on their hands. And
exactly. No, that's such a case of blaming the victim of this betrayal. It's you know, it should be where it belongs, which is with the Guardian. But, you know, it's just one of those things, again, where the lies get so generalized in the public that people have the misperception of that. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you think people need to know about Julian Assange that they don't know already, just for the people that maybe haven't watched all of the vigils, haven't, you know, been super involved with supporting WikiLeaks? What would you say that they should know about Julian, maybe his character or just, you know, the work that he does in general?
Well, I don't know, you know, I know both of his parents very well. And I've stood in the same room as him, but it was a very bad day. I couldn't actually talk to him because it was the Supreme Court. And so I've exchanged emails with Sarah Harrison, who was writing at the time on his behalf occasionally, and sometimes just she was, you know, managing certain things. But I've never actually had a one-on-one with Julian conversation. Maybe I will one day. It would be really, really nice. Because I've heard that he's an incredibly nice guy, you know, at a personal level. Slavoj Zizek says that, you know, he's not the person. His father told me once that that he had, his manner of public speaking had really improved. He thought that somebody had, you know, helped him out a little bit because he seemed quite awkward at first. He never really intended to be a public figure. And in fact, from what I read, he, you know, there was always a lot of quite a few people, not a big team, but there was more than Julian involved in founding WikiLeaks. There's a number of Australians, Dan Matthews, the mathematician, for example. But somebody had to be the lightning rod for all of the flack that WikiLeaks was getting, and so Julian had, you know, one thing, as I said last time, his dad said he has steady nerves, right? Which is funny. It still makes me smile, that term, steady nerves, to say the least. Tim Foley said, you mean balls of steel. But anyway, just somebody, it was a dirty job, somebody had to do it. So he became the spokesperson of WikiLeaks. John said that, his father said that he was a bit awkward at first, but then his manner of speaking got better. And I wonder if it wasn't John Pilger, because John Pilger is such a great orator. And John always, when he's delivering his speech, somewhat like Chris Hedges, this wonderful technique where they don't rush through anything. They just leave every phrase with you, leave a bit of time for you to reflect on it. And so I saw that Julian began to speak that way, and he was able to communicate well with people, but it made him a little colder and less spontaneous, because even in the cypherpunks, with his mates, Jacob Applebaum and Jeremy Zimmerman and Andy, I can't remember the name of his surname, but those three, when those four were together, he was very informal and laughing away. Whereas when he must feel a real burden of responsibility to be very, very careful about every word that he says. And I know he gets some help. Felicity Ruby was helping out. I don't know if she still does, but Felicity Ruby was helping both Julian and Scott Ludlam, with research. She's a political researcher, an amazing mind, and a beautiful, wonderful human being as well. So, some of the time the speeches were his thoughts, but they were well worded for him, and he would be reading off the prompter, the teleprompter and stuff. So it made him seem a little bit more formal. But in fact, he's a very kind of normal guy in private. Everyone who's gone to see him at the embassy says that it's like a different Julian, just like you and me, and very friendly and informal in person. It's very hard to be a lightning rod for an organisation like that is telling the truth in a climate where we, for such a long time, we have been fed lies. Julian said that most of the wars, nearly all the wars in the 20th century onwards, were the result of media lies, right? Compliant media. It was a very neat system where you've got the weapons industry, you've got them Wall Street controlling the politicians. Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, in that famous sting from Channel 4, said, "The leader is always the puppet." Right. So, in fact, they're just the spokesperson as well, I guess. But you've got this force, and then what? Not Jonathan Holmes. We have another. Andrew Fowler, the Australian journalist, who was director of one of the WikiLeaks documentaries. He said what governments like is the official leak, right? So this is something that has been going on. They give the official leak to the journalists who will express it the way they want, and it's not necessarily the truth. It's the scenario that they want to fool people into going to war. Julian said, ordinary people don't want to go to war. They have to be lied and fooled into going to war. And if you look at the Iraq war, that was effectuated very nicely via compliant media, who would shape the thoughts of the population, control them. We've got the surveillance. Oh, yeah, they're watching our every move. So there's this perfect system now of control, which, if you watch that Andrew Feinstein documentary about the global arms trade, I mean, so much of this is about making massive amounts of money and keeping this weapons business going around the world, which is really bad for our planet. It's war is a major contributor to global warming, and it is impoverishing even great nations like America. David Bradbury, another filmmaker, went to America. He shot a film which we screened at Politics in the Pub here in Sydney, called America and Me, and he showed the state of America on the streets with veterans, with the streets now in America is just like the third world. It's just lined with homeless people, and they're putting so much more money in every year to this weapons industry. So that has to be approved of in some way, or at least accepted by the population. And that's, being effectuated by compliant media, this whole Russiagate thing. Drums of war, here we go again. Iran, here we go again. Weapons of mass destruction, they'll probably find another soundbite. But, the whole Russiagate thing, which Binney has shown to be, and his team showed to be a hacking story as bullshit, that all has to tie into ultimately a scenario of war. And what good is it doing for our planet or our people? So, I mean, it's like we're, the whole, humanity has become very sickened by these people at the top who have, no foresight and no conscience. And, my God, how did we end up putting all the bastards in power? I mean, we do it at the corporate level.
It seems like, even though the bastards in power are definitely and have obviously fought back against WikiLeaks for exposing them, the gift that Julian Assange has given us, absolutely, and WikiLeaks, everyone involved with WikiLeaks has given us, is seeing the reality of it. At least that's a start. If we can grab onto that reality and say, this is the tangible truth, that is such a groundbreaking change in and a development that we've never had before in history.
Yeah.
People say that, but I don't think you can overstate the importance of that. So.
Well, I think that's where our movement is really important. How many people have we got now? Last time I looked, it was 2,500 people.
Yes, I think it's around 2,500. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got that many people like you and me, with a few skills in this direction, that direction. Some of us are artists, like I am, and some are journalists. We're both journalists, and some are tech people. But the thing is that we're the last time I think Susie said we are outperforming the mainstream media by a mile.
And I think she also mentioned the intelligence agency task forces and the people that they have working on this. I liked it when she said that.
So that's great. I mean, it was very hard for activists on their own. And back in the day, I was pretty well on my own doing the stuff, although there was a huge army that was spreading it around. That was really great, and that was really successful. But now we've got something even more powerful. I'm going to say something that's a little bit shocking, because I've done so much research into this last year. We are Cambridge Analytica on steroids, but we're telling the truth. We're injecting the truth back into the bloodstream of the internet, and that's why there is a stellar growth in the support now for Julian Assange. I can see it in Australia here. That's a really crucial place for it to happen. People going, oh, I didn't know that the Crown Prosecution Service in Britain had delayed the case. Why did they do that? Yeah, good question. Why did they do that? I mean, it wasn't serving justice or anything. It was just maybe serving the US. So people are going, oh my goodness, the Swedish allegations were bogus. Oh my God, this guy's been set up for all this time. He's one of our citizens. And so as Australians are really starting to rally now. We've got, we're not allowed to protest anymore here. I don't know if you knew that.
I have heard that is an absolutely, atrocious draconian situation. More and more, it seems like in Australia.
Espionage and Foreign Interference Act got rushed through by both houses just about a month ago. So that's quite bad. We're not supposed to. So you can, it's considered a crime to share or even view WikiLeaks type documents. We're not allowed to protest. We're not allowed to assemble except at funerals. At funerals.
Wow.
Yeah, but try and tell an Aussie what to do. Ask
Yeah,
Kieran.
really.
Ask Kieran.
Definitely.
So there are big protests that are happening, and it's great that we have the people have actually got together, not just as supporters now, but as a kind of media organization in itself, which is flooding all platforms and actually bringing awareness now to, because they've just been brainwashed. Just misinformed or disinformed for so many years about this poor guy. Oh, that's not a way to describe Julian as a poor guy. He's a hero. He's a hero, and he's somebody that will go down in history as someone the world should be grateful to, because I think. I was saying this sort of in the last hour. We're in the prehistory of the digital age. I mean,
Agreed.
if you think about the printing press and people books, which they were pretty well forbidden for a long time, didn't want people to read, but that was a quantum leap for humanity in terms of human consciousness, and so is the digital age. And particularly the last 10 years, because that's where it was only 2006 that Apple brought out the first codec that would stream video full size. Before that, it looked like a postage stamp if it was playing fluidly, and or else it was all broken up and you couldn't bear to watch it. So it's 12 years now that we have been communicating a video from around the world. People get an actual view of what's happening, in the streets of Iran, for example. They were when the police were really being very repressive and violent against the people were actually messaging each other as well, saying, take the other street, kind of imitating the packets of the internet that would take another direction to get to the same destination. But it's only in the last few years that we're in absolute real-time communication with each other, window in space. And so you've got all these we've got the hive mind now that can converse in real time. And these are turbulent times because the old regimes still want their control over the information. And they keep prosecuting. Oh, you leaked, you're getting prosecuted. We're going to shoot the messenger. Well, we're going to shoot the whistleblowers. But as Ross Cameron, another Australian journalist, pointed out, they're incapable of securing the information in the first place. I mean, nobody escaped from Alcatraz because it was built that way, right? So, but they're not building the storage units for all of our information like Alcatraz. So where is the fault? With the people who infiltrate or with the people who don't protect our data? I mean, and in fact, we really have to think this through because, where are we going to be at the end of the 21st century in terms of privacy and flow of information? Well, I mean, most people say that, we're all just going to be inside each other's heads pretty well.
I think that's a really great question to leave off this segment with, because the answer to that question is going to be dependent so much, to such a huge degree, on how things turn out for Julian Assange, I think. Because as you said, this is going to be the determination of how everything develops for decades and decades to come. And with that question, thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us. It's incredible to hear your thoughts. As somebody who's been so involved in this for a number of years, it's amazing to hear from you. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that mask with us too. I actually did see that in a meme just a few minutes before I came on. So that's great to see. Thanks, Kathy.